My name's Aaron McCabe. I'm 42 years old. I live in Concord, Massachusetts, and I've been in IT architecture for 18 years. Thought I'd seen every flavor of corporate politics. I was wrong. 6 months ago, I started working on a pitch that could change my career. It was for Galtrix, a big fish in logistics tech, with a system so outdated it practically bled money. I found the leak, designed the fix, built the proposal from scratch. 62 slides, each one tuned to perfection. Every stat triple-checked, every visual polished, every footnote stamped with my initials. It was my win, or at least it should have been. That morning, I was in the war room putting the final touches on the deck when Glenn walked in, VP of Client Services, expensive suit, hair slicked back like a guy auditioning to play a Wall Street villain. He didn't even glance at me. He leaned over the table, grabbed my laptop, and slid it toward himself. "We'll handle this one," he said, smirk tight enough to strangle a fly. "You're just not senior enough for this client." I sat there stunned, fingers still hovering over the keyboard. "What?" Glenn turned to Tim, his golden boy, the guy who thought REST APIs were some kind of spa treatment, and handed him the laptop like it was a damn relay baton. "We've got it from here." They didn't even bother changing the footer. My initials, AMC, still on every page. I opened my mouth, closed it, nodded like some obedient intern instead of the guy who had pulled this solution out of thin air. Watched them walk off with my work like it was theirs. And the worst part? Nobody batted an eye. Not Janine, the director who hired me. Not Tim, who gave me a smug, "Thanks, bro," over his shoulder. Just business as usual at Nexara Systems. That was the moment I realized something. This place didn't care about merit. It cared about optics, politics, golf trips, and happy hour cliques. I sat there for a long time after they left, just me, my coffee, and the hollow feeling in my gut. But I wasn't out of cards. Not yet. Because while Glenn and Tim were prepping for their little performance, I was holding back one piece of the solution, the critical one. The kind of piece that, if you left it out, nothing else would work. The kind of piece that only I could explain. And they had no idea. 2 years ago, I walked into Nexara Systems thinking I'd finally made it. Senior infrastructure engineer. Good title, decent salary, access to enterprise-level projects. Nothing junior about me. I'd spent the last decade building logistics data systems for some of the biggest retailers in the country. This gig was supposed to be a step up, not just in pay, but in impact. Instead, it felt like being dropped into a frat house with a corporate dress code. Didn't matter what you knew at Nexara, didn't matter how well you coded, or if you could optimize a pipeline blindfolded. What mattered was if you played in the beer league with Glenn, or joined the VP's golf foursome on Fridays, or knew how to nod and laugh at the right time when the executive team made jokes about data guys being too intense. Glenn, the VP of Client Services, was the worst offender. Tailored blazers, that same overly cologne, slick-back hairstyle every single day, and not a single damn clue about how our infrastructure worked. The kind of guy who could sell an empty box with enough buzzwords and then leave you to fill it after the contract was signed. You couldn't tell if he was pitching software or auditioning for a car commercial. And then came Galtrix, $7.6 million in projected revenue. The whale. The internal whispers started early. Everyone knew it. Whoever landed Galtrix wasn't just getting a bonus, they were getting spotlight, maybe even a promotion. Glenn was already doing his strut, telling everyone, "This one's ours to lose." Tim, his hand-picked golden boy with the gift of gab and zero technical sense, started hanging around the pitch meetings like a cat near an open tuna can. But they didn't find the problem. I did. Buried in a forgotten log stream from their processing engine was a recurring loop. Overlooked, inefficient, and devastating. A data overflow cascade that looked harmless at first, but was draining close to $2.9 million a year in redundant compute cycles. Their system was bloated, slow, and expensive, and nobody had caught it. Not Galtrix, not Glenn, not even Janine. I stayed late for 3 weeks reconstructing their traffic load behavior, built a new model, rebalanced the pipeline, designed a throttled loop system with dynamic memory handoff. Nothing flashy, just efficient, quietly powerful. I showed Janine the results one Friday night. Just the two of us, in the third floor conference room, empty office behind the glass. Her eyes lit up. Aaron, this could be it. This is the kind of fix they'll remember. I actually believed her. Janine was the one who brought me in, said she was tired of politics and wanted people who could actually do the work. She wore jeans to meetings and didn't talk in circles. I respected that. She said, "Let me get Glenn up to speed. We'll need him to package it right for the execs." That should have been the first red flag. The moment she said package, I should have known. Because the following week, I noticed things shifting. I wasn't in the pre-pitch calls anymore. My name stopped showing up on the meeting invites. Glenn and Tim started holding strategy huddles in the glass room with the blinds closed. When I walked by, their laptops were open to my proposal, my models, my architecture. I went to Janine. "Hey, I've been pulled from the prep sessions. What's going on?" She gave me that soft HR-adjacent smile, like she was practicing empathy. "Glenn wants to control the messaging? Don't worry, you're our backbone here." Backbone? I'd heard that before. It's what people say when they want you to carry something heavy and invisible. No spotlight, no seat at the table, just the scaffolding behind someone else's stage. I nodded, walked out, closed the door. And that night, I stayed late and created a duplicate version of the Galtrex architecture files. Everything looked the same visuals, same descriptions, same conclusions. Except one thing. I pulled out the core, the auto-balancing buffer loop. The very function that made the entire optimization work. If they wanted to use my work without me, they'd have to explain it without me too. It wasn't revenge, not yet. It was insurance. Because the moment they tried to wear my win like a suit, I'd be ready to walk into the room and remind them exactly who built it. It was a Tuesday when the calendar invite dropped. Galtrix wanted a face-to-face, in-person pitch, full presentation. Office buzz like someone had cracked a window in a stuffy room. Everyone knew what this meant. If we landed Galtrex, that was 7 figures in new revenue, minimum. Glenn strutted through the floor like a man on a runway. "Let's bring our A game," he said at the all-hands that afternoon, grinning like he'd discovered fire. Then he turned to Janine and said, "You and Tim will run point." No mention of me. Not a word. Not even a thanks in passing. I sat there with my arms folded, heart thudding in my chest. My proposal, my work, was going to be handed off like it was part of the company's furniture, and I wasn't even invited into the room. Later that day, I cornered Janine in the hallway. She was grabbing tea from the break room when I stepped in. She looked up like she expected it. "Glenn thinks senior leadership should present," she said before I even opened my mouth. "Optics matter." "Optics?" I repeated. "So, who's answering the technical questions?" "I'll handle them," she said. "You walked me through everything." I stared at her. "Janine, you know this system inside and out?" She blinked, her jaw twitched. "I'll be fine," she said, but it sounded like she was trying to convince herself, not me. "And how do you feel about this?" I asked. Silence. She didn't answer. She didn't even look at me. That was the worst part. She wasn't proud, she wasn't confident, she was just complicit. The same person who told me, "I want doers, not talkers," was now standing there, letting the talkers walk away with my win. I should have lost it, should have marched into Glenn's glass-walled corner and demanded a seat at the table. But I didn't. Because I'd already made my move. Weeks earlier, when it became clear Glenn was sniffing around for credit, I started carving out the heart of the solution. Quietly, carefully. The auto-balancing buffer loop? Gone. The adaptive logic table? Stripped. I rewrote the docs to sound complete without being complete. It left in just enough to impress a non-technical crowd. Just enough for someone like Tim to nod and smile through a meeting. But if anyone asked a real question about load memory thresholds or failover latency, they'd have a problem, and the only person who could fix it would be me. That weekend, while Janine and Tim rehearsed slide transitions and punchlines, I was home rechecking every line of code in the real model. I had sacrificed 4 months for this proposal, missed my kids' baseball tournament, worked through bronchitis, put in back-to-back 60-hour weeks while Glenn played executive dress-up, and Tim Googled what horizontal scaling meant. I wasn't going to let them erase me. Not completely. So, when Monday rolled around and I got the official message, stand by in case you're needed, I didn't rage, didn't argue, I just sat at my desk, waited. Because they thought I'd roll over, they thought I'd take it. But they didn't know what I'd done. They were walking into that meeting with an engine and no ignition switch. And the second someone tried to drive it, they were going to stall. Hard. That morning, I showed up in business casual and a calm I didn't really feel. I'd been told to stand by in case you're needed, which in Nixara speak meant sit down, shut up, and make yourself invisible. So I parked myself in my usual cube with a lukewarm coffee and a spreadsheet I didn't care about, open on my second monitor. Just background noise while I waited for the crash. At 10:06 a.m., the elevator dinged and 5 people stepped into our office. The Galtrix team. 2 men, 3 women, mid-40s to mid-50s. Sharp suits, sharper eyes. One of them had a nameplate clipped to her blazer. C. Bowman, Chief Technology Officer. I watched them walk down the corridor, Glenn right there in the middle, leading like he was a war general. Tim followed behind, carrying my 62-slide proposal like it was his baby. Janine brought up the rear, smiling like a stewardess in turbulence. From my seat, I could see the glass walls of the conference room. I sipped my coffee and waited. 30 minutes in, I saw it. The moment it happened. Bowman leaned forward, tapping a specific line in the proposal. Her expression shifted. Not annoyed, confused. She tilted her head slightly, narrowed her eyes. Something didn't add up. Tim started gesturing with his hands. Always a bad sign. You can tell a guy doesn't know what he's talking about when he starts waving around buzzwords like a magician trying to distract a crowd. Then Bowman flipped the page back, pointed again, said something. Glenn stepped in, probably trying to charm his way through it. But this group wasn't having it. Bowman sat up straighter, raised one eyebrow, and crossed her arms. Tim leaned in like he was trying to explain particle physics with a cartoon. Janine started talking. Bowman interrupted her. Then, like synchronized swimmers, all 5 Galtrix executives turned their heads. Right at me. From where I sat, I could feel the spotlight hit. I didn't move, just blinked once, took another sip of coffee. My phone buzzed. Janine, 10:41 a.m. Come in. Now. I stood slowly, like a man summoned to the gallows. Straightened my shirt, took one last glance at the monitor, showing a fake budget review I hadn't updated since last week, and walked toward the conference room. I opened the door, silence hit first. Glenn looked like he'd swallowed a lemon whole. Tim's eyes darted everywhere but mine. Janine's smile was there, but it was trembling. Ms. Bowman, Janine began. This is Aaron McCabe. He worked on some of the back-end analysis. Some of. Worked on back end. Bowman didn't look at Janine. She looked at me. You wrote this proposal? She asked. Yes. From scratch? Yes. She nodded, turned the binder to a page near the back. There's a function missing, she said plainly. Auto-balancing buffer control. Your model references it, but the logic flow never appears. Why? I didn't answer right away. I walked over and took the empty chair at the table, not in the back corner, right in the middle, right where Glenn should have put me from the start. And then I said, calm and clear, because it's not in the deck. Bowman raised an eyebrow. Why not? Because it's not something that can be explained on a slide. You'd need simulation models, real-time examples, a full behavior map. I didn't include it because nobody but me could walk you through it correctly. Janine shifted in her seat. Glenn stiffened. Bowman didn't move. Go on, she said. So I did. I explained the missing buffer logic, how Galtrex's overflow cascade was bottlenecking memory, how my solution introduced a 9-layer loop system that auto-throttled based on real-time transaction behavior, how the cost savings weren't just in processing, there was projected server load reduction, maintenance hours, and failover risk mitigated. As I talked, her team started asking questions, one after the other, and I answered every single one. Glenn didn't speak again. Tim looked like a kid who forgot his lines in the school play. Janine nodded occasionally, but I could see it in her eyes. She knew the show was over. Finally, Bowman sat back and tapped her pen on the table. Why wasn't he in the room from the start? She asked, not looking at Glenn, looking through him. Glenn cleared his throat. We We thought senior leadership optics would present best to your team. She tilted her head. I'm only interested in who understands the system. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just looked straight ahead. Because I knew what was coming next, and it was going to shift the entire game. I stepped into the room like I belonged there, because I did. Glenn's jaw tensed the second he saw me, and Janine's smile looked like it had been stretched too tight for too long. Tim didn't even make eye contact. Glenn tried to take the reins before I got 2 steps in. This is Aaron, he said quickly with that dismissive little chuckle he always used when he needed to downplay someone. One of our tech guys helped on the back end. Helped? Bowman didn't even turn her head. She said it flat, like someone calling out a lie before it was fully spoken. Her eyes met mine. Mr. McCabe, can you explain this data protection function that's referenced here but never detailed? I pulled the chair out, the chair not one against the wall, and sat down like I'd been waiting for the invitation. Glenn's face twitched when I did. It's not in the slides because it doesn't belong in slides, I said calmly. You can't capture a 9-layer buffer loop with dynamic throttling tuned to transaction behavior using static diagrams. You can try, but all you're doing is oversimplifying a system that adapts in real time. Bowman folded her hands and leaned forward. So, walk us through it. I nodded. The core issue was Galtrex's load overflow during peak transit cycles. Their system was scaling horizontally, but had no intelligent routing logic tied to memory strain. My solution implements predictive throttling with historical behavior modeling, what I call the buffer loop. It learns, it adjusts, and it reroutes before overflow even begins. I heard one of her engineers mutter, "That would have saved us 3 outages last quarter." I kept going, answering every question thrown at me. They weren't softball questions either. These folks weren't there for show. They were the kind who lived and breathed technical pain points, architecture, latency models, fault tolerance, the kind of stuff Tim once referred to as back-end wizardry. Every answer I gave pushed Janine and Glenn deeper into their chairs. At some point, Glenn tried to chime in again, but Bowman cut him off without even glancing his way. When the room finally quieted, Bowman gave a short nod. Impressive. You clearly understand this inside and out. Then came the question. Mr. McCabe, she said, if we move forward with this solution, would you be leading implementation? Glenn jumped in before I could speak. Of course. Aaron will support. No, she interrupted. I'm asking him. I looked right at her. Yes. If I'm in, I lead. Otherwise, I can't ensure it's done right. Another short pause. Bowman glanced at her team. They nodded. Then that's our ask, she said. If Nexara wants this deal, he runs the show, directly. Silence stretched across the table. Tim's face had gone pink. Janine looked like she was calculating whether to panic now or after the meeting. Glenn's lips parted, but nothing came out. I sat back. I didn't gloat, didn't smile, just let the moment settle, because they wanted me out of the room, and now they couldn't move forward without me in the lead. Table turned. I hadn't even made it back to my desk before the ping hit. Heather, HR, conduct review, 4:30 p.m., Richard's office. Attendance required. No explanation, no details. But I knew exactly what this was. Glenn was already swinging. I spent the next 3 hours printing everything. Emails, chat logs, version control logs, timestamps from our code repo, Slack messages, Jira threads, even screenshots of the proposal metadata. Anything that proved what I built when I built it, and how I'd been cut out of my own work. By the time 4/28 rolled around, I had a 3-inch stack of documentation in my arms and a boiling calm in my chest. I knocked once, then stepped into Richard Casey's corner office. Glenn and Janine were already there. Richard sat behind his desk, tie loosened, arms crossed. Heather, our HR rep, was off to the side, her notebook already open. Glenn didn't wait. He sabotaged the meeting, he said sharply, standing up like he was about to present a closing argument. He intentionally withheld critical information from the Galtrix proposal, putting our company at risk. Is that true? Richard asked, turning to me. What's true, I said, setting my stack of documents on his desk, is that I wasn't allowed in the room to explain the work I built. I was told I wasn't senior enough. I was told optics mattered. I tapped the folder. That's the full record of the Galtrix project, from the day I found their back-end flaw to the final revision of the deck. Emails, timestamps, everything. Richard opened the folder slowly. He flipped the first few pages in silence. I could feel Glenn and Janine watching him, but I kept my eyes on Richard. After a minute, he asked, "Why wasn't the algorithm in the slides?" "Because if I'd included it," I said, "I would have been erased completely. They already cut me from the meeting. If the solution had been fully baked into the deck, Galtrix would have been left with nothing but a sales team bluffing through my work." Janine finally spoke. "Aaron, you were part of the process." "No, Janine," I said calmly. "I built it. You walked through it. That's not the same thing." Glenn scoffed. "This is petty, unprofessional." "You mean like taking credit for a system you couldn't explain when the CTO asked the first question?" Richard raised a hand, silencing us both. He looked down at something Heather slid across his desk. It was a printed email. Heather cleared her throat. "This came in an hour ago from Galtrix CTO Carol Bowman." She glanced up at me. "It's addressed directly to Richard. She wanted to clarify that her request moving forward was conditional. The deal only stands if Aaron McCabe leads implementation, and no one else." That shut Glenn up fast. Richard leaned back in his chair and studied me for a long moment. Then he turned to Glenn and Janine. "Leave the room." "What?" Glenn blinked. "You're siding with—" "I said leave." They both stood. Janine looked down at her feet. Glenn didn't. He stared daggers at me as he walked out like he was swallowing a lemon whole. The door clicked shut behind them. Richard leaned forward and said, "That was a bold move." "Dangerous," I replied. "I know." He raised an eyebrow. "You know what else is dangerous? A VP bluffing his way through a pitch to a $7.6 million client." I didn't respond. I didn't have to. He glanced down at the Bowman email again. "They want you, specifically. That gives you leverage. So, tell me, what do you want?" I didn't flinch. "I want to lead implementation. I want to report directly to you. And if I deliver, we talk promotion." He nodded once. "And the algorithm?" "You'll have the documentation by morning," I said. "No redactions, no omissions." Richard picked up his pen. "Good. Because I don't want to be exposed like that again. Ever. Don't make me chase what's in your head." "You won't need to," I said. "You're paying attention now." And just like that, I was in. But what none of us knew yet, what was waiting just around the corner, was that Galtrix didn't just want my expertise, they wanted options, and they were about to make it known. The next morning, I sent the documentation to Richard by 8:03 a.m., fully detailed, annotated, and version controlled. No watermarks, no drama, just clean bulletproof work. At 8:19, I got a reply. "Received, solid work. Let's talk rollout Monday." It was short, but the tone had shifted. That wasn't a manager thanking an engineer. That was a CEO keeping an eye on someone he now saw as an asset. But the bigger shift came later that afternoon. Bowman requested a direct call, just me and her. No invites, no calendar fluff. Just a Zoom link and a subject line that read, "Galtrix Next Steps, Strategic Discussion." I joined 2 minutes early. She was already on. "Mr. McCabe," she said, giving a small nod. "You did more than sell us a solution. You demonstrated why we needed one." "Appreciate that," I said, glad it came through. "It did," she said. "Which brings me to why I asked for this call. We're moving forward, but under a few conditions." I raised an eyebrow. "Conditions?" "Yes, 3 of them." She held up a finger. 1. You are contractually named as the implementation lead, not just in spirit, in writing. I nodded. "Understood." 2, she continued, "I want quarterly technical check-ins with you. Not a team, not a proxy. You." "Fine by me," I said. "I'd rather you hear it straight." "And 3? She paused, then leaned in just a bit. "We want a clause in the contract. If Nexara underdelivers, we reserve the right to hire you directly." That one hit like a punch wrapped in velvet. I sat back. "That's unusual," I said. "So is finding someone who actually solves our problems," she said. "We've burned through 4 vendors in 2 years. I'm not doing it again." I didn't answer right away. My brain was already running 10 different tracks. "May I ask," I said finally, "is this about me, or is it about not trusting the people around me?" She didn't flinch. "Both." The call ended in 10 minutes, but the impact stretched a lot further. I walked straight into Richard's office with a printed version of the clause. His eyes widened before I even sat down. "She wants to poach you," he said. "She wants leverage," I said. "I'm giving you the heads up, not an ultimatum." He didn't speak for a while. Then he waved for legal. 2 hours later, we had a counteroffer drafted. By end of day, it was locked. The new terms: I'd lead the Galtrix rollout from start to finish. I'd report directly to Richard, bypassing Glenn and Janine entirely. I'd be promoted to systems director, effective immediately. And I'd get a back-end percentage of the Galtrix contract tied to performance milestones. By 6 p.m., legal had drafted the clause Bowman wanted, with a few extra guardrails. She signed off, and just like that, the balance of power inside Nexara shifted, fast. People noticed. Whispers started. Emails changed tone. Glenn's name stopped appearing on certain threads. Janine started copying me instead of the other way around. And 2 days later, I got another message. Subject: interested in similar results. Are you taking other clients? 2 new prospects, both asking for my team. By name. About a week after Richard signed off on the Galtrix contract, I got a calendar hold from Carol Bowman. No subject line, just her initials and a time slot. I figured it was just another onboarding sync, maybe some early milestones to review. It wasn't. She opened the call with, "We're moving forward, but under a few conditions." I didn't say anything, just listened. "1," she said, folding her hands in front of her. "You're to be contractually named as the lead on all phases of the implementation, not just in the internal scope, but in our legal agreement." "All right," I said. "What else?" "2," she continued. "I want quarterly technical reviews. With you, not a report, not a proxy. You." "That's doable," I said. "I prefer direct contact anyway." She nodded, then paused for just a second. 3, and this one's the sticking point. I want a clause written in that. Should Nexara underdeliver or reassign you without client approval, we reserve the right to extend a direct offer. I blinked. "You want a hiring clause?" "Option clause," she said calmly. "It won't be triggered unless performance drops, or you're removed from the project. But I want the leverage." I leaned back in my chair. "That's unusual." "So is finding someone who can actually solve our problems," she said. There wasn't a threat in her voice. It was just the truth. I brought it straight to Richard. He stared at the clause for a solid 10 seconds before sliding it across the table to legal. They freaked. "You're letting a client draft terms that weaken retention?" one of the attorneys asked. "I'm not letting them do anything," I said. "They're stating a preference. If you don't want clients trying to hire your staff, try building a company they don't want to leave." Legal sputtered. Richard didn't. He just looked at me and said, "What would it take to make sure that clause never gets used?" I shrugged. "Back me. Give me the room to build the team I need. Let us deliver." By end of day, the contract was signed. The clause stayed in, with slightly softer language, but the message was clear. I wasn't just a resource anymore. I was the one holding the leash. By Friday, the news had made its way across the building. People started stopping me in the break room, asking if I had room on my project team. Engineers who'd been stuck in back-end maintenance hell were suddenly poking their heads into my office, curious if there was a place for someone who's sick of red tape. Janine avoided eye contact entirely. Glenn didn't show his face for 3 days. And then, just after lunch the following Tuesday, my inbox lit up. Subject: interested in replicating Galtrix results. Available for exploratory call. Sender: CTO, Darrow Logistics. An hour later, another one. Subject: Nexara, Galtrix rollout. Can we discuss similar scope? Sender: CIO, Zentrix Freight. Both wanted the same thing. Me. Specifically, my team, the one I hadn't even hired yet. And just like that, the balance of power at Nexara shifted for good. I wasn't a name buried in the footer anymore. I was the name on the front of the damn binder. Richard held the announcement at 10 Noor a.m. sharp. Company-wide, packed room. Bagels and coffee out front like it was just another quarterly check-in. But it wasn't. He stepped onto the floor in front of the main projector screen, buttoned his blazer, and said, "The Galtrix deal is signed. $7. 6 million, multi-year, high visibility. Applause, real, loud, surprised. Then he added, the technical proposal that secured this opportunity was developed and delivered by Aaron McCabe. He'll be leading implementation as systems director, reporting directly to me. More applause, but this time, less surprised. A little more pointed. I didn't stand or wave, just nodded slightly from where I sat near the side wall. The front row clapped hard enough to look supportive. The middle rows looked confused. And the back, that's where I caught Glenn's face. He looked like he'd bitten into drywall. Rigid, pale, his mouth opened slightly but said nothing. Janine clapped, but her eyes were darting everywhere, anywhere but toward me. Afterward, people came up one by one, a couple pats on the shoulder, some finally murmurs. Even Raj from QA, who'd been stuck testing half-baked builds for the past 3 years, walked up and said, if you're building a team, I want in. I made a note of that. Glenn found me in the hallway later, just outside the elevators. Enjoy it while it lasts, he said quietly, leaning in like he wanted the cameras to miss it. I smiled. Already documenting everything, Glenn, just in case you forget who does the actual work. He didn't respond, just walked away, slow and stiff like his own tie was choking him. Within a month, he was reassigned to a special advisory role, whatever the hell that meant. Some VP-sounding title with zero influence, no reports, and a desk somewhere near the vending machines. Janine kept her job, but the invites stopped coming. She wasn't on the next pitch, or the one after that. Meanwhile, I built my team. Started with Raj, then Melissa from back-end ops, quiet, sharp, always overlooked because she didn't kiss up. Brought in Carlos from support engineering. The guy had built 3 internal tools no one knew existed because nobody had asked. Within weeks, we had a new workflow. Real project docs. No fluff. No jargon. Just engineering that worked and communication that made sense. By quarter's end, we weren't just delivering for Galtrex. We had 2 more clients lined up. $12.3 million in pipeline, all under my lead. That's when people stopped calling it Aaron's lucky break. They started calling it a turnaround, a shift. Glenn was a memo. We were the new machine. 6 months later, I stood at the front of Galtrex's Boston boardroom, pointer in one hand, remote in the other. Big glass windows. 10 execs around the table. Carol Bowman at the head, nodding slowly as I clicked through the final slides. Phase 1. Implementation, I said, has already reduced compute overhead by 8%. Projected to hit 11 by Q3. Latency dropped 22%. Server load balancing has stabilized, and your ticket volume down 41%. I paused, letting the numbers breathe. Your team's uptime is about to become your new normal. The room stayed quiet for a beat. Then Bowman gave a small, satisfied smile. This, she said, is what we were promised. And then some. I nodded. We're ahead of every benchmark. We'll keep pushing. As the meeting broke up, I shook hands, collected notes, and chatted with a few of the Galtrix VPs who were already asking about how to expand the rollout into their overseas operations. As I gathered my gear, Bowman lingered. Not to make this about me, she said, but I've never seen a vendor turn around this fast. I smiled. We stopped being just a vendor the second you called me back into that room. She grinned, then glanced at her phone. Zentrix and Darrow both asked me about you, by the way. I know, I said. They're in the pipeline. By the time I made it back to my office at Nexara, my real office, not the shared pod with the flickering fluorescent light, my calendar was full. 3 client calls, 2 internal strategy reviews, 1 onboarding for a new hire, Quinn, a young engineer from support I'd flagged 3 months earlier. Smart, precise, the kind of person I used to be, good at the work, invisible in the room, not anymore. Now I was the room, and the company? It had shifted too. Glenn was still technically on payroll in that vague strategic initiatives role that meant he had no authority, no team, and no decisions to make. Last I checked, he was working remotely from Scottsdale and hadn't been looped into a single new client since March. Janine stayed. HR said letting her go would trigger legal headaches, but she was boxed out. Her last internal project update ended with Richard thanking her, then turning directly to me for feedback. Meanwhile, my team had grown. 9 engineers now, most handpicked from within. Folks who knew the systems, but had never been given a voice. Raj was leading our rollout tracker. Melissa was rewriting the legacy API schema. Carlos was building internal tools so efficient, other teams started asking for access. We weren't just a team anymore. We were the engine, and that back-end percentage Richard had promised me from the Galtrix deal, it landed, quietly. No confetti, no email blast. Just a line on my pay stub that made me sit up straighter. I forwarded it to my wife with one line. Looks like we're finally taking that road trip to Oregon. At home that night, my son asked if I'd be able to come to his fall game this year. Wouldn't miss it, I told him, because I'd already lived the version of me who worked 60-hour weeks just to watch someone else take the credit. That guy was gone. This version of me, he knew his worth, and he was done waiting for someone else to recognize it. They wanted to cut me out. I rebuilt the table and took the head seat. The real win wasn't the contract. It was finally getting to work like I mattered. Because now, I did.